At this time, I'll invite both of our speakers up here so that we can have some Q&A. There are 2 microphones. So please direct your question to one of the speakers, and we'll take the first question here to my left.
Yes, thank you. This is directed to Dr. Accad. I just want to say thank you for your overview of the publications. That was very helpful. What I would like to ask is if you could address another form of communication, which is becoming very prominent in the Arab world, which is satellite television. I know there's ArabSat, and a number of evangelical organizations have linked up with ArabSat. And if you could comment on the effect of that in terms of communicating the evangelical message, but even more the fact that many of those evangelical organizations, like CBN, have a strongly anti-Islamic, pro-Israel slant to them, and that more and more the word evangelical, especially American evangelical, is being linked with anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, pro-Israel sentiment. And particularly, how is the evangelical community in the Arab world dealing with that import of a strongly anti-message coming from evangelicals?
You've said it all. The satellite channels in the Arab world are exactly what you said. I couldn't repeat it as well as you said it. There's maybe one exception with Sat7, which is not aggressive towards Islam or Arab culture, and it's programs that are developed locally. Other programs are mainly talking heads and dubbing, so dubbed programs. So, you know, the same sort of thing that you're seeing in the publishing world, where you have about half of what's being published is the translation from English of highly popular literature. I mean, some of them are actually the same people. You know, I mentioned. You know, I don't want to name names because it's not the issue, but many of the authors that are being translated are also the ones that are being dubbed on these TV channels. And so I think there's a lot of money that's coming in to do this sort of multifaceted marketing. And as I said, I mean, I think it's playing some sort of role that is useful to some people, no doubt about it, otherwise it wouldn't be so successful. But it's a very individualistic need that it's fulfilling. And I think it separates the local Christians from their own context in many ways, because it's a very external message. What it does to the Arab church is, again, as you've said, we're very quickly associated as evangelicals with Zionism, with whatever American foreign policies are the policies of the day in our region. On the other hand, you know, when I build relationships with Muslims, you know, I give them my card that says that I work at a Baptist seminary, and they're immediately interested because, you know, it's Baptist, you know, they're intrigued, you know, who's this guy who's coming to us, and he's evangelical, and he must be a Zionist and a pro-Israeli and an anti-Muslim. So I use that also for my own purpose. I don't know if that addresses your...
I too would like to thank you both for your presentations. One of the things I've been trying to familiarize myself with is the reading more about the whole insider movement, and it's something that the denomination that I'm a part of is likely going to be taking up at some level this summer at our General Assembly. And so I just wonder if you could kind of give any insights as to what the discussion looks like within kind of the Arab context. I have to confess, most of the folks that I've been able to read are what Westerners think about the insider movement coming from both sides. And so I just wonder if you could comment on what that discussion looks like inside the Arab or even the Indian community in terms of, because I know there's insider movements within Hinduism as well. So.
Well, this might be a can of worms, so I'm not going to go too far in it. You can, if you've read some of the conversations happening, one of them was taking place in this global conversation in preparation for Cape Town. And one of the topics was the insider movement. I was asked to respond to the main article that was written by Joseph Cumming, and I entitled my response, "Away with the Sterile Debates." So maybe that summarizes a little bit what I think of. I think we're asking the wrong questions in the wrong place, in the wrong way. And, you know, I don't really have an opinion about what is often just trying to be described on a spectrum. I think what was initially developed as a descriptive framework for a phenomenon that was being observed on the ground, which is what John Travis was doing, has been turned into a methodology. And I think, to me, that's the key hermeneutical error. And then you have a lot of discourses and comfortable conversations taking place from behind, you know, seminary desks and offices everywhere, not just in the West. I mean, it's happening also in the Arab world. But the realities on the ground are so different. And personally, I think we need to ask the right questions. And to me, the two key questions in this issue are, if I'm accompanying a man in his journey, the man I read the Facebook message, if I'm going to accompany him through discipleship, I'm going to ask him, I'm going to journey with him and keep helping him to ask, what do I need to do? What do I need to give up? What do I need to preserve in order to preserve my witness and be salt and light in my context? Because I believe that God calls people in context primarily for their context. And the second question I want to help him wrestle with is, what are you going to have to look like so that the people that are around you in this closely knit community, your mother, father, uncles, cousins, grandparents, are going to look at you and say, this guy is not a traitor, but he has something that's actually interesting and reproducible. So what do you do to be, how do you become a reproducible model? How do you avoid losing your witness in context? These are, to me, the two questions of evangelism and discipleship, not just in the Muslim context, but everywhere. I ask the same questions of young people who, this is a confession, there was a time in my life where I had hair and long hair, and I wore ripped jeans, and I played in a Christian heavy metal band called Empty Grave. I'm not making this up. And when young people who were in the occult, drug subculture and all of that, decided to put their trust in Jesus, you know, I learned the hard way that there's no point for them to go and start breaking their records, because 2 weeks later, if not before, they're going to regret it, and you know, it's like opening another door for Satan. So I'd much rather help them reflect through what is it going to take for you to be able to become salt and light in your community, and how are you going to become a reproducible model in context. So I think we need to ask the questions of discipleship. I don't think churches and mission organizations should write policies for or against. We're going to give money, we're not going to give money, we're going to cut off missionary, we're going to start financing another missionary based on that issue. It's the wrong question. In India?
Very briefly, I'm the generous Indian who'd allow Martin to talk.
I'm sorry.
And so, and the question was, directed to him. But one thing in common, I played in the first Indian rock band.
And you still got the hair.
And the sound. I still sing also. The Beatles and the Rolling Stones, those were the songs we used to sing.
This is also for Dr. Accad, and I am actually shocked to see your hair so short because the last time I saw you, it was long. So, anyway, my question, you mentioned earlier that in order to see a truly indigenous Arab contemporary theologizing, the first step you mentioned is, some of the more substantive works need to be translated rather than the fluff that's often out there. So my question is, first of all, have you seen any interest in some of the publishing houses out there towards doing that? And are you sort of involved in encouraging that? And the other is, how does the whole orality issue enter into that? Because this is very much a print medium that we're talking about with the books and so forth.
Yeah. Yes, I work at the Baptist Seminary. As I mentioned, we have a sister organization, which is Baptist Publication, or Dar Manhal Hayat, the Life Source Publishing. And we have an ongoing project of translating high-quality theological textbooks to support a theological education program. It's not the sort of projects that are easy. It's hard to convince donors to actually support a program like that. It's expensive. And it took us about 10 years to convince certain partner organizations that it's actually important. And you cannot expect us to suddenly start creating a writing movement of new theological ideas ex nihilo. When I studied undergraduate theology degree in English language in Beirut, and then I did all of my theological education in English. I came back to Lebanon in 2001. I couldn't form a theological sentence in Arabic. I had to, I'm serious, I went, and it took me a while. And I teach in Arabic. Our seminary has all of its program in Arabic. I really struggled. It took me months before I could teach in Arabic. And I was born and grew up in Beirut. So this is the reality we're working with, and I believe that we need a translation movement before. So we set up, finally now we are in the process, and we have set up a publishing committee in the seminary, and we work closely with our sister organization so that we control what is being, well, in that particular project, we control what is being translated, so we make selection of the textbooks we want to see in Arabic. We monitor quality and translation and accuracy in theological translation. I was having lunch with one of your professors at Wheaton, and we were talking about the possibility of translating some of his books. So there is an emerging interest. You have to convince also the publisher that there's any kind of market for that sort of readership. But you look at the data, there's actually about a little over 20 theological programs in the Middle East, North Africa region. Altogether, they have about 1,200 students at any one time that go through. So every 4 years, technically, you could sell, 1,200 copies of every textbook, which is a fairly good number if you do the marketing correctly. So, I mean, these are some of the things we've been trying to do. One thing that I haven't touched upon in my paper, and which our ABTS database project doesn't deal with, is also internet publishing. I mean, I think the internet is what's shaping the minds of young, emerging evangelicals in the Middle East, North Africa region. It's not the printed book very much anymore. So, but that is not being covered. What exists there, I have a hunch about it, but so because I see it in my students' papers, But otherwise, you know. As for orality, I think we struggle a little bit in Lebanon because we have such a high level of literacy. We have, you know, about 60 universities for 4 million people. That serves the region. So we haven't been very good at paying attention to orality issues. I know a few projects that are going on, individual ministry efforts of people who, for instance, have ministry among Bedouin tribes or this sort of context where orality is very important, but I can't address that very well.
I have two short questions, one for Dr. Gnanakan from India. You mentioned about the theology of suffering, and I did not understand, are we asking our Western friends who live not in the age of suffering, I mean, their suffering could be that they are having a cold cup of coffee instead of hot. For me, coming from Asia, studying in Asia, and now here, I will very much hope and pray that we do not pass this burden to the Western Hemisphere to prescribe a theology of suffering for us without suffering with us in the South Asian or Middle Eastern context. And my prayer will be for my Indian brothers and sisters, even though if their English may be poor, that they may write their own experiences so that we may be enriched by their pain and suffering in biblical context. So that will be my hope and prayer, especially from my Indian friends. So I don't know, maybe I was not so clear. Could you just maybe briefly comment, and then I'll come to Dr. Accad.
I'll be brief. When I say theology of suffering, the reason I say we need to develop a theology of suffering is that suffering has always been looked at only as physical suffering, whereas there's the mental, psychological, agonizing that everybody is going through, even in the developed nations. So we don't need to look at suffering only from the physical side. My holistic, integrated kind of view wants me to look at suffering from all those perspectives and to make sure that we develop a biblical view of that.
Thank you. Dr. Accad, one for you. I really appreciate your presentation. I was a little bit concerned with the last portion, which for me probably is the most important one, being raised in a Muslim convert's home from Pakistan. Lately, at least, there's a major movement, and our brother mentioned insider movement. I'm not going to go there, but I'm going to mention what you mentioned about the Bible translation and consideration that we will change or we will substitute the word Son of God and add something different. And you and I both believe, or we live in the Muslim context, that the very fact that the Muslims always tell us that we are changing the scripture, now they are going to bring us a Bible, or actually in some contexts they have already published it, and this is basically done by the Western missionaries, a Bible that is quote-unquote Muslim-friendly. We were in Philippines last December, and we were with SIL people, and the lady said, she's a consultant, she said, we are going to change the word beloved now. Son of God removed, beloved entered, put it in. So we asked, beloved.
Oh, okay. Instead of Son of God.
Instead of Son of God. And so we asked her, you know, you understand for whom beloved is used in Islam? She said, no. And you and I both know that beloved is used for Habibullah, for Muhammad. And she had no idea. I'm not throwing stones at her. My point is this. Are we going back to our Western friends again as Asians or Middle Easterners to describe or prescribe something that will be so difficult for you and I to defend in our own context? That is my struggle.
I knew I was opening a can of worms with that one. But, you know, sometimes you want to throw these in a little bit as well. It's an unresolved question. I think, first of all, I think we need to put that on the table. It's a very valid conversation. Hermeneutically, it's a valid conversation. And in terms of accurate translation, if you want to convey what Son of God meant to first century Jewish audience, you know, of Jesus, and communicate the same message to 21st century Muslim, if you use Son of God, there's no question that you're not communicating the same concept. So there's a translation issue about being literal about that. Now, you brought in the question of the tahrif, so the accusation that we corrupt our text and we expose ourselves to this accusation if we change such key concepts. I hear you on that one. I actually believe we need to have as many different translations as possible in the Muslim world in order to demonstrate that we have a different view of God's revelation, God's scriptural revelation. To me, it opens wonderful conversations with Muslims when they say, you know, why do you have so many translations? Well, let's talk about how God reveals himself. Now, the question Son of God and substitution with something like Habib, which actually I've come across a text from the 8th century that uses that in a poetic form in the temptation of Jesus, in kunta lahu habiban, instead of if you are the Son of God, if you are the beloved of God. So it's an old, it's actually an Arab Christian in the 8th century that thought about that already. So it's nothing's new under the sun. That's the interesting thing in this life. I like what Mazhar Mallouhi did with his latest translation of the 4 Gospels. He actually uses in the text, if I'm not mistaken, he uses Son of God in the text and then has a footnote that explains what is meant by Son of God. The other way, it could be done also the other way around, where you use a different term, like Habib, for instance, but you have a footnote and say the original Greek would read literally Son of God, but we've avoided it because it's misunderstood, but this is what Son of God meant to the 1st century Jew. So I think when we substitute, we've got to do it transparently. So never should this kind of translation strategy be done without transparency, I think, because you don't want people to think that you are trying to do something undercover with that. So, but there are many ways of doing that in a transparent way, but in a way that makes it hermeneutically more correct, and from the perspective of translation theory, more correct, in my view.
Okay, we got 5 minutes, so 2 questions, real quick.
Hi, my name is Shim. I'm a Nigerian student in the US. I have a question for you, Dr. Akkad. Yeah, given the prominence, the growth, the political control of the Wahhabis and before them the Hanbalis, who make all the decisions now in the Middle East, and they control what is to be preserved as Islamic history. They take no reference about the great names you mentioned, like Akindi, especially the person I like, Ibn Rushd, Averroes. His works are not even seen in the Muslim world. Amongst the evangelical in the US, you never even hear about that Islam even has a rich philosophical history that you just mentioned. So given these divergences, I'm thinking to myself, if we're going to have a theological transformation in the Middle East, shouldn't we even be starting from that place first before we even talk about Christian theology in terms of published works?
I want to make sure I understand the question. So yeah. Are you saying, shouldn't we be translating these works?
Yeah, shouldn't they be
of philosophy?
Yeah, yeah. As in, since they were engaging some of the questions the later Western theologians are engaging, right?
I mean, there was a whole school of translation. These works exist in Arabic.
Yeah, but are people engaging with them scholarly?
Not anymore.
That's
not
my question.
Much,
yeah. That's the question I have, both in the Islamic, the Middle East of today, and amongst evangelicals or evangelical academia in the US.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it would be the right thing that I'd want to encourage people to go back to medieval Arab philosophy. It ended up being a bit of a, do you say, hermetic conversation between the falasifa, both Christian and Muslim. You have a very interesting mix of Muslim philosophers that teach Christian philosophers and Christian philosophers that become teachers of Muslim philosophers in the school of Baghdad. And, but then you have a reaction to that with Al-Ghazali, who writes a refutation of all of this, entitled Tahafut al-Falasifa, the absurdity of the, or the nonsense of discourse of the philosophers. And so it created tension between the theologians and the philosophers. So,
but are the works of the theologians, those theologians being read now?
The Muslim theologians?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, these are the fathers of Sunni Islam that were quite often very anti-philosophy, Arab philosophy.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'll make the question rather quick. This is for Professor Gnanakan. I'm pretty sympathetic to much of what you said, so this is by no means an aggressive question. It's a question of clarification in some way. As I look at your 6 propositions, I'm always a bit nervous when Christ shows up at the very end, not as the ground or center or beginning. And that's present, it seems to be, in a conflict that I'd like you to resolve. You spoke very positively of religion, that God is in all religions already at work. And yet you also confess that not all spirituality is genuine and therefore could be demonic. So wouldn't you want to extend your awareness of the demonic side of religious experience, and wouldn't you want to extend that to admit that perhaps God is not working in these other religions as well?
I don't think it's contradictory. God is working, but yet Satan's working also. There are many demonic manifestations in religion, and many of us confront those demonic manifestations. There is no contradiction in what I say. Similarly, I believe even Christianity has some demonic manifestations, and we've got to accept that. And your first question is, why did I put Jesus at the end and he was not central? This is once again my integrated, holistic approach. Whether you put Jesus at the end or the beginning, he's all over. I'll give you an example. When I first read a debate from the World Council of Churches where mission began to be broadened out, it was, we accepted the church, at least God, the church, and the world. And then the mission theologians, Huykendijk and others from the World Council of Churches said, no, it's the world speaking to the church, and the church addressing God. That is what mission's all about. I laugh at that because this exposes once again the Western linearity, the silo. Is it this? Is it this? It's got to be this. God, the church, the world, everything going around so that it mixes and blends into one whole. And to that I myself, by myself, say, amen.
Join me in thanking our speakers.